Stalin as warlord. Now, published in 2022, this book is one of the latest failed efforts to analyze and to assess Stalin as a warlord, as a military commander of the highest level, published by the Yale University Press. Firstly, I'm inclined to think that war is too serious a business to be left to Yale University Press. Yale reminds me of my very dear friend, school fellow, college fellow, who was a complete failure in academics, and he used to pass exams after failing twice or thrice, and he went to Yale and became American celebrity. So the very word Yale is, it creates doubts, skepticism. Now, the problem with Americans is that they are unable to understand and they are not ready to accept how a non-American, an Asiatic from Caucasus, a man who was totally opposed to the so-called hypocrite American values, how this man achieved victory, how he defeated the greatest army in history, in modern history. Americans are at a loss, and repeatedly they try to denigrate Stalin, to run him down, to degrade his status, and so on. Stalin is a very vast subject, is a massive phenomenon. It is impossible for a Yale scholar or a professor like Reber to even judge Stalin. The first problem with this book is that it is non-committal, wishy-washy. He beats around the bush, brings in irrelevant things, and has been unable to do justice to Stalin as a warlord. Total failure as far as I see it. Now, published in 2022, and you can see this is the book, printed in Great Britain by TJ Books, Cornwall, Yale Books Company. You say, well, nonsense, For Marsha, what do we do with Marsha? Now, the very contents are disappointing. He snipes continuously at Stalin, mobilization and repression at the center. Typical American lame duck, crocodile tears, mobilization and purges on the peripheries. Nonsense. Nothing to do with Stalin's rating as a warlord or assessing him. Fighting the war, forging the sinews of war, scientific and technical intelligentsia, on the cultural front, winning the peace, a Pyrrhic victory. Naturally, Americans didn't do fighting. 90% of fighting was done by the Red Army, by the Soviet Union, and of course, Americans had a very nominal Mickey Mouse role in the Second World War. Yes, where the mattered was the American industry, the American economy, which of course played a very major role in defeating the Nazi Germany and in helping the Russians, the Red Army, to win the war. So, American role has to be seen relatively. But the problem with Americans is that they are always trying to run down the leader of the country who led one of the greatest war efforts in modern history and defeated a West European for some Central European power which had no military rival as far as the military excellence was concerned, the Wehrmacht, no doubt. Americans are at a loss. And this book is also one more effort to run down Stalin, non-committal, unable to decide clearly, mixing human rights with war, absolute, pearls of nonsense. As you can see, chronology, glossary. The writer is unable to arrive at a clear conclusion. Of course, his conclusions are, non-committal. He is unable to decide. The gist of the major factors which this Yale University professor ignores, number one, he fails to understand that it was Stalin's willpower and resolution at the highest level which enabled the Red Army to defeat the Germans. His obstinacy and his resolution in face of the German onslaught on Moscow, when he slept in the Moscow underground, opened the churches and decided to abandon the communist slogans and went for the Russian nationalist slogans. Of course, without Stalin's resolution, there would have been no German defeat in 1941. But Reber, wishy-washy, left, right, talking, hair splitting, you are a professor in Yale, okay. You may be very knowledgeable, you have done very well in academic life. But you are not a classic historian or an analyst like perhaps Gibbon. Gibbon was too big for you. You are not even near Little Heart, you are nowhere near J.F.C. Fuller, you are not even near Seaton, you are nowhere near Glantz. I think it was a folly for Mr. Reber to write this book because he has brought out nothing new. He fails to understand that Russia was a miserable failure in the First World War, but now comes a man from the most unknown place, Georgia, and he leads the European Russians into victory over the greatest army. Certainly, this man's decisions, Stalin's decisions, they can be criticized, but certainly in 1941, 42, 43 and 44, it was Stalin who was the major architect of the Red Army victory, the Soviet victory, with all his faults. Reber fails to understand that the whole process of the Russo-German war was so vast, was so complicated, that a Yale University professor cannot even come near judging it. I mean, Yale should stay away from Stalin because Yale simply cannot produce a man who can judge Stalin. And of course, his great decisions, the way he handled the Red Army overall strategy, especially in 1941 at Moscow, the way he wooed the Japanese, he went to the railway station to see off the Japanese ambassador, the Japanese foreign minister, just because he had won the greatest diplomatic masterstroke of the Second World War, obtaining the neutrality of Japan in 1941. The way he handled Red Army in 1943 and 44, when another man would have collapsed. If Reber had just concentrated on the fact that it was Stalin's resolution that in the final outcome decided the issue, he would have been wiser. But a sad book, non-committal, typically, overblown. Journal of Military History of the USA is very fond of elevating American authors as the greatest thinkers, my foot. Certainly a bad reading. I was very disappointed to read this book, and of course nothing good was expected from a Yale professor, and I think at the age of over 90, Reber should rest. He is not simply capable of judging Stalin, and I think it was a mistake that Reber wrote this book. And secondly, Reber is praising characters like Zhukov, who were highly self-centered, egoistic people. If Zhukov was removed by Stalin, he was also removed later on by Stalin's successors. Because Zhukov was an upstart, full of himself, not a man of real substance or depth, and Russia is too big. I repeat, Russia is too big for Americans to even judge it. As Churchill said, it's a riddle wrapped in, enigma and all that. Churchill, of course, was also a conceited character, but anyhow, he understood the Russians more than Yale professors. Certainly, this book was a big disappointment, and this humble scribe would not recommend it to any person.